Hello, I am Meri Musinyan and I am very happy that you are listening to my podcast now. My podcast is usually in Armenian, as Armenian is my native language, but sometimes I do interviews in English as well. So today my interview will be with John Hodian, who is the leader of a very well-known the Naghash Ensemble. Before we start our conversation, I would like to share with you some information about John Hodian. John Hodian is a composer, conductor, and pianist whose music is deeply influenced by his Armenian roots. John's work is a natural expression of his interest in Armenian folk, classical, and spiritual music. Along with his formal study of European classical music, world music, and a wide variety of improvised music including jazz, classical, avant-garde, folk, and rock. Hodian received his master's degree in composition and conducting at the Philadelphia College for the Performing Arts. While teaching composition and music theory at the University of the Arts, John was conductor of the Philadelphia New Music Ensemble and associate conductor of the Philadelphia Youth Orchestra. His music has been heard in numerous feature and documentary films, dance pieces, chamber music ensembles, stage dramas. For the last 15 years, John's focus has been on creating music for the Naghash Ensemble. Armenian medieval poet, priest, and artist Mkrdich Naghash appears to have been reborn after centuries. During his first visit to Armenia approximately 15 years ago, American-Armenian composer, pianist, and conductor John Hodian heard the voice of soprano Hasmik Baghdasaryan singing in Garni Temple. Upon hearing Baghdasaryan's enchanting voice, Hodian knew he wanted to compose something for it. His search led him to the Middle Ages, where he discovered Mkrdich Naghash. Hodian was so impressed with Naghash's works that he based his music on them and, with the assistance of professional Armenian musicians, founded the Naghash Ensemble in Armenia. For more than 15 years, the Armenian group has performed on various stages worldwide, creating an original and harmonious palette of spiritual, modern, folkloric, and classical music. Following years of successful touring through Europe, Armenia's highly acclaimed Naghash Ensemble will embark on its debut tour of North America. During the first 2 weeks of March, they will perform concerts in different US cities and one in Montreal, Canada. I spoke with John just before the tour. Hello, dear John. Thank you.
Hi,
Thank
how
you
are
very
you?
much for your time, and I hope you feel in Yerevan very well. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. I spend, most of my time here, although I had been in New York for a couple of months,
Hmm.
I've been back in Yerevan now for 3 weeks,
Yeah,
and it's great. It's always good to be here.
yes. And you are preparing for your American tour, yes?
We are, and it's been a long time coming. I don't know if you know, but we were originally supposed to do this tour in November of 2020.
Yes, I
And
know.
you can
Mhm.
imagine what happened.
Yes,
Obviously, COVID ruined
yes,
that. Luckily, all the presenters agreed to put it back together
yeah.
as it was, and it worked out great. It actually worked out even better.
Yeah, wonderful. And we will talk about the tour and Naghash. But before we will start to talk about the concerts and upcoming concerts and about Naghash, I would like to ask you, John, I read about you, whatever I could, your interviews, the information which I could find in internet. You are American Armenian composer, for nowadays leader of Naghash Ensemble. And when we say Armenian American composer, all Armenians immediately think, oh, this now John is doing this because of his Armenian heritage, because he is somehow a guy from diaspora, Armenian guy. Is
Mhm.
this really connected with your Armenian roots, with your Armenian identity? What you are doing now with Naghash, or it is your composer life or composer point of view?
It's an interesting way to put that question. It is absolutely both. I mean, it's funny. I've given a talk several times on Armenian identity and Armenian musical identity, and it's something I find very interesting for a lot of different reasons. First of all, just the question of what is Armenian music is a very interesting question, because
Yeah.
you get into parsing, what is Persian, what is Arabic, what is Turkish, what is Kurdish, what is Armenian, in terms of just purely questions about Armenian music.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, but yeah, I grew up in a very, very tight-knit Armenian family. All my parents' friends were Armenian. The church we went to was Armenian. My father did not have anything in the house other than Armenian records.
Oh.
So I definitely grew up in a kind of an Armenian mindset. But there's a lot that I still mostly identified as American
Mm-hmm.
until I came here. I didn't do all the typical Armenian things necessarily. I didn't go to the Armenian Olympics. I didn't go to the Armenian dances. I didn't study Armenian. My parents spoke Armenian to each other,
Mm-hmm.
but not to us, not to the children.
Mm-hmm.
So it really wasn't until I came to Yerevan, and I was thrown into a whole different thing in a lot of ways, not only culturally, but started hearing a lot of different music, different Armenian music. The Armenian music you grew up with in the West is very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Of
My
course.
father had like Richard Hagopian, and he loved Unik Dinkjan, and of course all the music you'd hear in the church. The spiritual music is largely the same.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the popular music, Armenian popular music, and a lot of of course, Armenian classical music is the same as well. But there is a very big difference between what you grow up
Mm-hmm.
hearing as a Yerevansi and what you grew up, as I did growing up outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah, when you were talking about this, I was thinking about Saint-Exupéry's words that whatever you have, you are taking it from your childhood. Is it true in your case?
In some ways, yes, but in some ways not. And again, this is something I've thought about quite a bit, about what makes you what you are.
Yes, exactly.
I actually came from a not very musical household. No, my parents were not musicians at all, not musically inclined.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when my older sister got a piano, I think she was about 14 and I was maybe 9 or 10. It was a little late. But the minute they brought the piano into the house, I just totally gravitated to it. I mean, I just started making up melodies on it and kept going and going and going. And then my sister was taking piano lessons, and then she would teach me everything she had learned. And I developed very, very quickly. So she put me in touch with her teacher directly, and things kind of took off from there. So again, what I got from the culture growing up, again, was a lot of Armenian music, but it was a lot of other things as well. I mean, it was a huge mix of things, but certainly I didn't grow up in a particularly artistic world. My parents were not artists at all, and I think they would be shocked if they found out, if they knew at that time that I was going to become a composer. It became pretty clear by the time I was, 13, 14, a teenager, that was going to be my route.
How you discovered for yourself the beauty of Armenian music or Armenia itself?
Again, there were kind of two things. There's what I grew up with, and that was not only the music, that was the food, the dancing, the culture in general. Again, going to Armenian church, Armenian weddings, everything. But when I came to Yerevan, and that was later in life, that was when I was in my 30s, I guess.
This was the first time? I'm sorry, this was the first time?
Yeah. First time was 2005.
Oh.
So, 18, 19 years ago. It was it really had a major impact on me. There's a gentleman who heard, I was living in New York. I was doing a lot of films and television. I wasn't really involved in Armenian music per se that much, but I developed a fairly successful career doing music for films and television. This gentleman heard some of my music on the radio, and he contacted me and said, "Hey, I'd love to meet you somewhere." And we met for dinner, and he was a very, very charismatic guy. His name's Naghash Ensemble. You might know him.
I know him from Narigasi Center. Yes,
exactly. So we agreed to meet at a restaurant in downtown New York near Times Square, and again, he's a very, very charismatic guy. He's waxing very enthusiastically about Armenia. We have a bottle of wine for dinner, maybe two, and he says, "You should come to Armenia." It's like, yeah, someday maybe I will. The last thing on my mind was coming to you. It really was. He said, "Well, great, come in 3 weeks." I said, "No, I can't. I've got so much going on. I'm busy. I'm scoring this. I'm doing that." Anyway, between his pervasiveness and our persuasiveness, and the fact that I got a call that things are always switching in the film world. Oh, this got pushed. Oh, this needs to be due here. Now they're changing the schedule.
Yeah.
Turns out that period of time was suddenly free, and I decided to go. And it was kind of an almost whimsical decision, and yet it was totally life changing. Because coming to Yerevan was I don't know, what can you say? I think a lot of diasporans go through this when they come to Yerevan for the first time. They really fall in love with it. They really, drink the Kool-Aid. And for me, what was so great is I was able to experience a whole different level of musicality. Again, I grew up with this one type of Armenian music, but it's not like every night there'd be a different Kamancha recital or a great duduk player or some interesting Armenian band or something going on like that. And the other thing, and there's a bit of a longer story, but I'll tell it if you don't mind.
Of course. At
that time, and again, this is 18 years ago, you used to be on Vernissage, you used to be able to buy the Komitas transcriptions of folk songs. For they were $3 or $4 in a hardbound, those hardbound things. And so I bought them all.
I guess in
Vernissage. Yeah, you don't see them anymore. I mean, now you have to pay, I don't know how much, but you have to go into a nice store and all that. They used to just have them, but lots of them on Vernissage. They were dirt cheap. But I tell this story because I've always had kind of a musical practice that I do in the morning, something that I do in the morning. I'm a huge, huge Bach fanatic. So I always play Bach at the piano for a little bit every morning. And there's some other things that I do in the morning too, some types of exercise and meditation and whatnot. But part of it is a musical component as well. And at the time I bought these transcriptions, I'd always heard of them, but I didn't have them. And every morning I would take one of those folk song transcriptions and I'd like play with my left hand, and then I'd play with my right hand and harmonize it and try different harmonies. And then I'd kind of improvise around it. And I just started doing all this. And I didn't know why I was doing it. It was just something to do that I wanted to do. But I did it for a long time, for like a couple of years, where that would be my kind of meditational musical practice.
Ritual, yes, life ritual.
Exactly, like a morning ritual of way of getting in touch with the muse, kind of.
Yeah.
But boy, what a golden thing it was to do, because it put me in touch with all this kind of Armenian folk songs that I didn't necessarily grow up with, that I probably would have if I had grown up with here. And you know, if you do that enough, it kind of becomes part of your own musical DNA. And it was a combination of doing that, and again, hearing all the stuff that I was hearing here, and then hearing, I've told this story many, many times about how the Naghash Ensemble was formed, but hearing this one person's voice, the voice of Hasmik Bagdasaryan, hearing her sing in Garni Temple, it was just such a beautiful, beautiful sound. You know, the quality of her voice, the material she was singing, she was doing this Armenian medieval spiritual music, and hearing it in those acoustics, I just needed to take that sound, you know, and find a way to make it my own. And I you know, I hadn't met her. I kind of introduced myself to her and said, "Oh, boy, I've got this. Your voice is so beautiful. I'm going to write these pieces for you, and we're gonna do this. We're gonna tour all over the world. We're gonna," you know, she didn't know who I was. She probably just thought I was crazy. But you know, 3 or 4 years later, I went back to her with some of the early sketches of what became the material for the Naghash Ensemble, and you know, we slowly started putting it together. And that was kind of the origins of the Naghash Ensemble. So those two factors, I think, hearing Hasmik's voice, and then this kind of very deep dive into Armenian folk music in a kind of more natural way, and just hearing people. I used to always love to go outside of Yerevan too. You know, you'd hear different people singing, and you just soak up the culture in a totally different way than you possibly could if you were, you know, growing.
Մեզ բարկացավ քաղցր բնություն աստվածային, մեզ դառնացավ
I think your case and Naghash case, if I'm allowed to say in this to define like this, it's somehow the very right example of how you gather all this cultural heritage, and one day just feel that you have it in your blood. Just it was sleeping somewhere very deep. And Komitas and Hasmik somehow opened all these doors. The country itself, the people itself, the feelings helped you to open this inside you. I just imagine like this.
Absolutely, even the landscape and everything else.
Yes.
You know, at that time, Nade had been building Nadagasi sushi as well. So I was going out to sushi a lot. And then I performed at the opening of the Art Center in Shushi. So just that journey, which I took many times, just driving through the landscape of Armenia, you soak up a lot, for sure.
Yeah. So the story, somehow the background of the story, how Naghash Ensemble was created, now we know. But you know, the very interesting thing for me, okay, you heard Hasmik's voice in Garni Temple. You discovered for you, let us say, Armenian folk and spiritual music, right in Armenia, having these transcriptions of komitas, living in the country, knowing the country. But how you came to Naghash? Naghash is not very well known poet. I mean, you know, we the people from literature and language field, Armenian study field, they know Naghash, Makartich Naghash, but it is known, he's known very well known. How you discovered him, and why Makartich Naghash?
Yeah, good question. Okay, I had resolved I was going to write these pieces for Hasmik. Obviously, she's a singer. You need text. I'm really sensitive to the text that I'm working with. It had to be just the right text, and I just started reading absolutely everything I could. And I talked to everybody. I talked to Armenian literary people. I thought maybe there might be a modern poet I could collaborate with. I tried all sorts of different things. And then I kind of described more and more the sound that I was going for, and what I knew exactly what the music was going to sound like. I knew the energy it was going to have. I even knew I wanted to use multiple voices, because I'm a real counterpoint freak. So I knew there's going to be multiple voices. I knew I wanted to work with ud and dol and duduk, but I didn't know what it was that I wanted to say in terms of the words. And I looked at everything, and everyone said, Nadagasi, you've got to read Nadagasi. And I did. I think I read the entire book of Lamentations. I read several other things and so much stuff. And then I even read Frick, and I read a bunch of other well-known Armenian poets, and a lot of it was great, but none of it was really quite right. And then there's this three-volume set of, I think it's called the Armenian Heritage, Armenian Heritage of Literature. It's in these 3 big volumes. And like right in the middle of the second volume is just a couple of stanzas of this one Naghash poem. He is not a very well-known poet, not nearly as known as some of the other poets I just mentioned. And yet these couple of stanzas spoke so elegantly about the life of the Gadi. Gadi is the word, Middle Armenian word, Middle Armenian word for exile, person without a home, living in sorrow. And he spoke so beautifully about what that is like, what a hardship it is. I mean, Naghash himself was forced to live in exile for a big chunk of his life, which is another whole story, which we won't get to. But he wrote very beautifully about that. And of course, that concept of, homeland, living in exile is something that's important to all Armenians. The question of homeland looms very, very large. And for me as a diasporan, and then coming back to Armenia and being so in love with living here, it certainly resonated. But then the other beauty of the Naghash text is, in his time, those texts were intended to be spoken. It was an oral tradition. They were literally performed. And often they were chanted or sung. We don't know what that music sounded like. And I'm not in any way trying to recreate what it might have sounded like. There's no way of knowing. But it gave those texts a certain musicality. And because it's Middle Armenian, you're using a lot of different words about, even my whole ensemble are Yerevansi, and yet some of them are like, I don't know what that. I really had to get, clean translations of everything and work with people at the Matanadaran and several other Armenian scholars all around the world. And I actually have been really lucky. I realized this the other day. I was talking to somebody. I've worked with some of the best Armenian scholars in the world. And some of whom are not Armenian, like Peter Cowie at UCLA, Theo von Lint at Oxford, and now this younger generation of people like Michael Pfeiffer at University of Michigan, or Jesse Arlen, who's now running the Zorab Center in New York. People are doing amazing, amazing work on the literature of that time.
So Naghash was somehow an Armenian platform for many scholars.
Well, they didn't all focus on Naghash. Peter Cowie is probably one of the best Naghash scholars. Luckily, he was in Yerevan at the time, and I interviewed him, and he was very, very helpful with translations of the first volume of everything. But again, it's the musicality of the language, the fact that it was all perfectly rhyming quatrains. So the rhymes are just wonderful, and the inherent musicality of the language. And the meaning of the words, it made it just so easy in some ways. I just read the text. Actually, I have one of my singers, Tata, reads the text for me. So I'm hearing the text. I actually have a very specific process where I have the Armenian written out, and then because my Armenian is not that good, I have the transliteration, so I know what the word sounds like. And then I have a word for word meaning, so you know exactly what you're setting as you're setting it. And then I have a poetic translation. So every line I have, I'm working from those 4 different lines. But it's the only way for me to kind of really know what I'm doing.
Yeah, to go deep.
Yeah. But then I just, I do the very first thing that comes into my head. Allen Ginsberg had a saying as a poet: first thought, best thought. Which isn't necessarily true, but I like the intent. You just put down what it is, what comes to your mind. And sometimes, often it's the right idea, and yet that idea is kind of buried still. And then you go through this process, this very difficult process of writing. As I say, writing is rewriting. So in some ways I'm very fast, but in some ways I'm incredibly slow, because it takes me literally years before each one of these pieces is done, because I'm just constantly rewriting it. And sometimes it seems like a stupid idea, that's a dumb idea, that's so stupid. And yet I know that it's the right idea. And yet it's that Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher, is that saying, it's that delicate sense of adjustment that is beauty. You just change one thing from here to here, and then suddenly it all comes into place, and then you know how to build on that. It becomes perfect.
Exactly. It means, John, maybe it means that you were so much in love with Makardich Naghash poetry that you had this patience to work on this project. Let me say, on this project years, because you should have this deep love in order to give your lifetime, to this. So, and yesterday I was thinking about that. Of course, Naghash Ensemble is about the music you created, and the musicians who are presenting this, they are doing it wonderfully. But also it is about our poet Makardich Naghash, because somehow you cleaned the dust which was on him. I mean, he was somehow a little bit forgotten, and because of the difficult times Armenia went through, we just didn't have time to take him out from the ancient times. But you did it, and now somehow Naghash Ensemble is the ambassador not only for Armenian music, let us say Armenian music. We will talk about how you would like to define your music, it is Armenian or not.
A very good question.
Yeah, but let us somehow say Naghash Ensemble is not only presenting Armenian music nowadays, also Mkirtich Naghash, our cultural heritage.
Well, yeah, you know what's one of the things that I'm happiest about and maybe proudest about is that we tour a lot. We tour a lot in Europe. You know, we're coming to America, but that'll be for the first time. But our tours in Europe are not for the Armenian community necessarily. There's always a certain number of Armenians that come out to it, but it's not like an Armenian thing, you know. Yes, we're the Naghash Ensemble of Armenia, and we can talk about whether the music is Armenian. But what I'm saying is the audience that comes is a typical classical music audience or world music audience, or you know, they're interested in some sort of new music, whatever. But they're not necessarily Armenians. And because this stuff is the words are what they are, I always speak a little bit about who Naghash was, why this concept of being an exile is so important to the Armenian people. So I love that we're able to do this, but not just for an Armenian audience. I mean, I'm thrilled that we have that Armenians do come out, and there's always a certain percentage of Armenians in the audience. And I'm also really thrilled with the way people have taken to it here in Yerevan. Actually, we're doing a concert on Saturday, and it's completely sold out. I'm really thrilled by that people here don't look at it as something like an outsider, you know, that's come and done, and that's really good. And again, when we play in Europe and even in our American tour, that is not only Armenian venues. You know, we're playing all sorts of venues. So you're not just preaching to the converted. You know, you're not just telling the people who already know about Armenian culture something. You're presenting it to people in a new way.
Yeah, I see. Did you have any chance to work with the archives during this exploring period?
Well, yeah, that's a funny story. Because again, all that I had seen was this couple of excerpts from this one poem in this book. I said, well, there must be more. So I looked, I searched everywhere. And I finally found that Naghash had all he left behind were 15 poems.
Yes.
That's all that exists.
Yes.
And then and again, it wasn't written down at that time. So, because it was really an oral tradition until somebody did eventually transcribe them. And then I also found out that Naghash was a painter.
Yes.
A very talented painter. So he was a poet, he was a priest, he was a painter. And I really wanted to see these paintings, but they didn't exist anywhere. They haven't been reproduced. And that brought me to San Lazaro. I went to the monastery of San Lazaro. That's a really funny story, because I wrote to them, I wrote to the abbot, said, you know, I'm doing this work and I'd really like to, and they were, oh yeah, well, we're very busy right now, so maybe get in touch with us in a month. Okay, so I wrote to them in a month. It's like, right now is not a good time. So finally, I think I was living in Berlin at the time, and we wanted to go to Venice anyway for New Year's Day. So I wrote to them, I just said, you know, I'm coming on New Year's Day. They went, okay. So I come New Year's Day, and there's only these two ferries, one in the morning, because it's an island. You know, the monastery is on an island. And the only thing that exists there is this monastery for these Armenian brothers. So I go there in the morning, and they have a little museum and everything, and I meet the abbot, and he's totally delightful. And he's showing me everything, and we're talking, and I'm telling him what I'm doing, and blah, blah, blah. I missed the ferry back. So now I'm stuck there all day. Don't worry about it. You can have communion with the brothers, and we're going to have lunch later. You'll join us for lunch. Well, and it was New Year's Day. So it's kind of a special day, I guess. But
somehow symbolic start, yes, symbolic start of this all this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, but it's a funny story, because we we end up talking so much, we miss lunch with the brothers. So it's just the abbot and I. And he said, don't worry, I'll get the chef to make us something. He's like, oh, why, you have a chef? That's great. So we sit down, and sure enough, this guy brings out like a plate of pasta and a nice salad and like a bottle of wine. And like we eat and we drink, and it's great. And then he brings out that was just the prima. Then he brings out another whole course of, there was like veal and this other, I don't know if it was just New Year's Day, but we had a lovely dinner, a lovely time, and it was great. And then I ended up taking the ferry home late that night.
Wonderful.
And while I was there, I said I'd love to be able to digitize these. They said, yeah, sure, when you come, we'll digitize them. But I got there at that time. I think it may have changed now. At that time, and again, this is at least 15 years ago, they didn't have any method for digitizing.
Digitalizing, yeah.
I had my phone, luckily. So I just took pictures with my phone.
Oh.
And as far as I know, those are the only reproductions of these Naghash paintings.
Oh.
And I've actually used a lot of those photographs that I took.
Yeah, in the CDs, yes. Also, you have this in the CDs, yeah, on the CDs.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
I had no idea that I'd be doing that when I took them.
Yeah.
In a lot of them, the abbot's thumb is there because he's like holding open the book and showing me things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
This is so beautiful, John. And I was thinking that you should write a book about the journey, how you discovered Naghash and all this. You should write a book, not only create music, you know.
I'd rather write more music and.
I mean, this is very
if somebody else wants to do a book, they can.
Yeah, I mean, this is really very interesting how you get in touch with Naghash, with how all this started. It is somehow not about Naghash, and it is more than about Naghash Ensemble, something very interesting personal story. So if you have time, that would be wonderful. So my next question is about music in general, John. World is sound. We were living in a sound. I'm always thinking about it, and I would like to ask finally to ask a professional person who is very good in, who knows really what is sound. So, how music comes to the brain? Is it consciously or unconsciously? Of course, you're a professional composer, but first of all, before professionalism, we are personalities. Yes, I mean, and how we gather all this of the sound of train, the sound of playing, the sound of just when you drink the water, and you know. Lots of sounds.
Well, I mean, all the sounds you talked about were, not necessarily musical sounds.
Yeah, but they could be. Yeah,
yeah, of course.
Yeah, sorry.
And there are many definitions of music, and basically, music is just organized sound. It can be, random sounds. It could be music, could be anything you want it to be. But it's all just vibration. And the tonal system that most people work with, most people know about, that most music we hear is written within this tonal system, that is definitely grounded in mathematics. Now, I don't approach it mathematically, but it's all through the overtone system, has to do with the way vibration works and ratios of vibration for different overtones, which causes different timbres of sound, makes the difference between a flute and an oboe is the different overtones. But those overtones are all mathematically related to each other. And if you actually draw those overtones out and put them on a music staff, the first thing they make is a major chord. So that working with tonality is completely grounded in nature. I think it's a very natural thing. That's why, when I was young and studying music in school, it's conservatory, and this was quite a long time ago, I'm dating myself, but it was very much a focus on the avant-garde, on composers like Stockhausen and Boulez and the second Viennese school, and it's very discordant, very avant-garde, nothing was rhythmic. You couldn't have anything where the pitches related to each other at all.
Contemporary, you mean? Yes, somehow contemporary music, yeah.
Yeah. And I pretend that I liked it, I guess, I kind of went along with it. You were really literally forced to write that way. They don't do that anymore. Things have like opened up and softened in a way. And now there's so many different styles and you're basically free to do what you want.
Mhm.
But boy, I really wanted to write my own stuff. And I was always drawn to a very tonal music. And a lot of it is grounded in folk music. A lot of the Naghash melodies are fairly simple, but they're deceptively so. Because they're always in kind of odd time signatures or in odd modalities. And I'm also working with a lot of different voices and counterpoint at the same time. So you're harmonizing things in different ways. In some ways, though, it's very hard. It's hard for me to talk about it because for me, it's the most natural thing in the world. The music of the ensemble is a combination of everything that I've been involved in all my life. It is partially this kind of Armenian folk spiritual music. It has its roots in that. You can hear that to a certain extent. But it's also, I think I said earlier, I used to be obsessed with medieval polyphonic vocal music. So there's a ton of that. And yet there's also a lot of new classical music, but more towards the like American minimalists like Phil Glass and Steve Reich and people like that were doing much more tonal, kind of almost trance music. But then, of course, again, I grew up in Philadelphia and New York, so you're hearing a lot of popular music. You're hearing a lot of very funky, very rhythmic music. Now, I don't think this music sounds like pop music, and most of the venues we play and it was a very interesting question when I first started this ensemble and writing this music, and I'm a very pragmatic composer. I've always toured and I've always done performances. So it's a question of like, well, what is this? Where are we going to play? Is it, we're not going to play in a bar. We're not going to play at a club or anything like that. It's really, again, my background is in Western classical music, and that's where we play. We play mostly, classical concert halls that want to do something a little outside the box or a little unusual. And then sometimes we play what they call world music festivals, where they look at music from other places around the world. I don't know that that answered your question at all.
Yes, of course you answered, and I realized that my question is not understandable somehow from the professional point of view, but what I was trying to say that when I'm hearing the voice of Hasmik's or Naghash's all these works, I always think that this is coming. Of course, I know that you are the composer and they are the artists who are presenting, but I have this feeling that this is coming from, I don't know, from the nature, from an unknown part of the nature, but this is the nature. This kind of feeling I have. This is somehow so harmonically done that you have this feeling. I heard them somewhere. I know this. And that's why I wanted to ask you how you take these sounds and how something could become so beautifully harmonically done. So
for me, the only thing I do is just I just follow my instincts. I don't think, oh, I want this to sound Armenian, or oh, I want to show off how much I know about counterpoint, or oh, we want to sound very modern here. I don't think about any of that stuff. I think about the text and the energy that presents.
Comes from text,
And then I just, like I said, first thought, best thought, you just spit out something. And again, you might spend the next year or two refining that and pushing it around and changing it. But where it comes from, it's like, I wouldn't have a clue, I honestly don't feel like I deserve any credit for it whatsoever. I just do, and I don't even know why I'm driven to do it. And this is something people ask about. Like, it's not even necessarily a fun process. In fact, it's a difficult process. It's like what Philip Roth, the writer, says about writing. writing is very simple. You just come down every morning at 8 o'clock and you open up a vein.
Yeah.
And it is, it's just very kind of, now why am I driven to do that? I don't know. But then once it's out and then it's like, then this is not, then I look at the next day and it's like, I thought this was good. This is horrible. It's like, I mean, I guess it would be a little bit better if I made it this, and then, but if I make it that, then I got to do this. All right, now we do that, and then you change it. And then the next day you think it's horrible again, and you change it some more.
Yeah.
And you keep changing and changing, and you rewrite and you rewrite and you rewrite. It's kind of like a sculpture where you're just chipping away, and you just keep getting rid of all the bad stuff until the only thing left is the good stuff.
Yeah.
I just think it's a willingness to put in the time. I just put in a lot of time. I spend a lot of time doing this. I really do.
Yeah, I can imagine. And this creative process never ends. Just it's ongoing process, creative process, and it somehow becomes a personal story also. Because when someone creates something, it becomes something very, very special, personal to him. Yes, not only for the audience. So I can imagine what could be it for you. The next question I would like to ask you, let us speak about the definition of the music you present in the frame of Naghash. One of my friends, when I introduced to her this music, she told me that, wow, this is something very esoteric. The other man told me that this is somehow meditation, music of meditation. And I before this interview, I asked 5 people just to have the different impressions and to share it with you. For me, maybe I already told you that this is somehow, I don't know why sounds for me somehow spiritual Armenian music, but it sounds for me somehow spiritual Armenian music. And my grandpa was in village. I used to visit him during all my childhood, and my grandparents lived in the mountains of Armenia. And when I first heard Hasmik's voice and Naghash songs, I remembered immediately the mornings in our villages when I opened my eyes. It was 6 or 7 in the morning, and this pure morning, this nothing else, this pure morning, and I don't know, in the world and this pure morning and you. So Naghash sounds, the music is very, very close to my heart and to my ears because it took me very special place. My other friend told me that it's somehow experimental music. Like little contemporary details there. How would you like to define yourself, the music you are creating for Naghash?
Yeah, that's really, really, really hard. I mean, yes, nobody likes to be pinned down in any kind of pigeonhole, but in this case, it's really very hard to figure out what it is.
Yeah.
Like I said, I consider my training as a classical composer, so to me, and everything is written out. We're not improvising. There are some moments of improvisation, but mostly it's written out, which is, one definition of what is classical music, I guess. It's very, very hard to define what it is. All I can say is it's this whole bunch of things that I've experienced over my life, and probably things that came before my life. My grandmother was a genocide survivor. She lived a very long time, and I was very young when she died. I was probably 9 or 10 when she passed away. She was probably 90 something, but she came from Kharkiv. So she came from a small village outside of Kharkiv. So that must be in there somehow. Actually, I'll tell you one other story, and it's a story I've told before, but it's a very, very meaningful one to me.
Yes,
because it is this question of what is this music, and is it Armenian music, and what is Armenian music, which is a big, big question for me. You know, and I ask it to lots of people, especially who have, some experience as, that are known Armenian musicians or composers. Well, what makes it Armenian, as opposed to one of these other things? Nobody ever gives me a good definition. It gets very, very complicated. But I will tell this story. You know who Tigran Mansourian is?
Yeah, of course. Sure.
The most highly regarded classical music composer, scored several of the Parajanov films, but just a very distinguished, very knowledgeable, very erudite man, and a lovely, lovely person. He's in his 80s now. And when I first came here, I was lucky enough to meet him, and I talked to him through a translator, because again, my Armenian is not good. And he was very, very kind to me. And so early on in this Naghash process, when I first had done the first tentative recordings with Hazmik and the ensemble ensemble's been the same exact group of people from the very beginning, and I think that's part of the key to their sound. But I had done these recordings of the very first Naghash poem I wanted to set, and I gave a copy of it to Tigran Mansourian. So he said, okay, thank you very much. He put it in his pocket. Next day, I get a call from his assistant. Now, again, he doesn't speak English. My Armenian is not good at all. So his assistant calls me, and she's, at that time, it was very kind of straightforward, almost like slightly Soviet style in the way she spoke, and was just like, Mr. Mansourian wants to see you. He will see you tomorrow at 3:00 at Parisian Cafe on the Volga. And I'm like, okay. And I thought like, oh boy, because he's like such a major figure. It's like, oh boy, what did I do? This sounds
something
bad.
wrong.
I kind of felt like I was called to the principal's office or something. Like I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble. And I remember going to this coffee shop and going, oh, what's he going to say? I'm like, oh, I'll just have to apologize. Oh, you came here, you steal our musicians. Like, what do you think? Anyway, I finally get there. He takes a CD out of his pocket. And he puts his hand on my shoulder.
Oh my God.
And he said, this is the sound of ancient Cilicia, somehow reinvented for the future.
Wonderful.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
That's a good thing, right? that's
sure.
good. And it was so, it was really affirming for me. I mean, because again, he's our, there's kind of Komitas, and there's some other musicians. I mean, Komitas is huger than anything, but I mean, Tigran Mansourian is kind of basically, if it was good enough for him, and if it was Armenian sounding enough for him, then it's Armenian enough for me. It's good enough for me. It's like, why? It really gave me a lot of
confidence and.
Yeah, it was very moving, and to this day we kind of use that as our logo. But it was him who said it. The sound of ancient. We say the sound of ancient Armenia reinvented for the future, but that was what Tigran called it, and I was thrilled that's what he thought. He was a very, very wonderful person, and then he actually said something else that was very useful. That was because there's a lot of canonic writing, a lot of like fugal writing, imitative writing. And I was very deep into this counterpoint, these writing canons, and he said, it's all so beautiful. At a certain point, perhaps the ear tires of so many canons. And I realized that was true. If you know what canonic writing is, it's very strict, imitative writing. And sure enough, I went through and I thinned out a lot of it. A lot of it was a little too heady and a little too abstract, and it actually made it much, much better. So I'm very grateful to him for both those things. For labeling it as the sound of ancient Armenia reinvented for the future, and telling me to knock off all those canons and make it a little simpler.
Yeah. wonderful. Just what you are telling, it's wonderful, and just to to have these words. Tigran Masurian is one of our, the spirits, Armenian, the spirit of Armenian music also for nowadays. Yes, and I can imagine what you can feel having these words from his mouth. So the next question I would like to ask you, John, is connected with the situation of the world. We can't separate our everyday feelings. We are living in a very hard time. There were in the world difficult situations, and also we can't forget 2020 year in Armenia, which I don't know, which was so painful, and until now we have these hard feelings in our soul and on our shoulders. And to continue to compose in these times, to continue to sing, to continue to present the music, what does this mean in these times? Is it separate from what are you doing from the world, where what is happening in the world, or it is somehow connected?
Well, there's many different ways of looking at that question, answering that question. I'll say that, yes, it is a very hard time, particularly for Armenians, particularly in light of what happened a couple of years ago, and what continues to happen, and the ridiculousness that what Azerbaijan has wrought, and this guy Aliyev, what a unspeakable, horrific, drives me totally mad. Especially coming after, as you know, Armenia had this revolution, which, I was here through that whole thing, and when Pashinyan first came to power. And despite what many people might think of him now, when he came to power, it was an incredibly beautiful thing. It was such an exciting time here. Such a liberating time, such a time of hope, and then to have the situation with Azerbaijan is horrific. However, we've lived through a lot of horrific stuff. It's what my grandmother lived through, what Jews in Eastern Europe lived through during World War II, what Naghash lived through. Naghash lived at a time of horrific plague, horrific war. His wife died from the plague. His son died in battle. So, working in a time of plague and war sounds kind of familiar. So, in many ways, the world's always been difficult. There's always been horrific challenges. And at the same time, in some ways, the world's never been better. I'm getting away from Azerbaijan and getting away from Russia and what's going on.
Yeah.
There are fewer people living in slavery. There are, percentage-wise of the population, there's fewer people living in total poverty. Women's rights are so much better. Gay rights, people's rights, people of color. There's so much more freedom now to do what you want, to be what you want, to in a purely democratic way. There's much more democracy throughout the world. Yes, there are dictators. There's Erdogan in Turkey. There's Aliyev in Azerbaijan, and there's many others. But there's never been, in some ways, you can say, yes, it's never been worse. Between environmental disaster, political disaster, what Russia's doing, what Azerbaijan is doing, total nightmare. And yet at the same time, for so many people, it's never been better. Now again, the COVID, this war, not only the war with Russia, but more importantly for Armenians, the war with Azerbaijan, it makes it hard to see that. But the reality is it's never been better. There's never been a chance for someone like me. I was not born into a wealthy family or anything, and yet I'm free to do whatever I want. I can write whatever kind of music I want. And luckily I made this thing for myself. I do think about that a lot because, being a composer is a very, very tenuous thing, especially in America. I mean, there's like nothing you can do to make a living. If you want to sleep indoors and feed yourself, you have to figure out something. And when I was young, I ended up doing a lot of commercial work of films and television and stuff like that. And then there's a period where I just said, I'm not going to do that anymore. And I stopped completely. And for 15 or 20 years, I don't really know, I was doing a variety of things and performing in different ensembles I was involved in, but I'm very, very lucky to have kind of created this vehicle for myself and to live in a time when I was able to do that and be able to get it out there in the way we've gotten it out there. I mean, we are touring at a fairly high level, and yet we've kind of done it in a very grassroots way. We're playing the nicest concert halls in Europe, and yet I don't have a big agent, and I'm not signed to a big record label, and I don't want either of those things. Because we're able to do what we want to do this way, and we're able to control it. And I can, write what I want and present it to people. And I'm very, very fortunate. So I'm answering that question in a lot of different ways. Yes, it's a hard time. It's a horrific time, especially for certain people, depending on where you're born, depending on what your economic opportunities are, depending on a lot of things. But at the same time, if you look at the history of humanity, again, it's not so bad for more people.
And also, I would like to ask you after this question, do you believe that music also heals somehow? Because nowadays it could be very important to know that music, from a professional, that music is healing also.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Now, again, some people, maybe more than others. For some people, it might be spending time in nature. For some time, it might be just spending time with their family. But for me, certainly, that's why I've always had this kind of morning musical practice, which is very important to me. The mind heals, the energy heals, and music is a type of energy, basically. It's a vibrational energy. And there's an intelligence to it, and there's a mathematical science to it, and there's a lot of things going on. And then there's a lot of things going on when the performance is live, which is a totally different thing from the recorded experience. And that's why I'm so glad we get to tour as much as we do, and why I'm so glad we're finally bringing the ensemble to North America. Because being in the room with it is completely different from just like hearing it or even seeing a video. It is not the same as being in a room with the vibrations of the musicians on stage and the energy of the musicians and the energy of the audience. It's a completely different thing. The ritual of going to a concert hall, when the lights come up and the ensemble walks out and they sit down in that little gap right before they're about to start, and it's like, wow, what's this going to be? Is this going to be, great, or where's this going to take me? And for me, it's as a performer, it's a very intense experience. I see video, of the ensemble, and it's like, oh my God, the way I'm at the piano is horrible. I hate the way I look. I'm like all bent over. I'm there. It's like this, contortions and whatnot. And yet I don't know. It's a very energetic. I'm putting out a lot of energy when we're doing this.
It's somehow a magical moment when the audience, singers, players, lights, sounds meet together in one place. It's really very magical moment, and I'm very, very looking forward to come to your concert in Montreal. I will be in Montreal.
But you're in Toronto, right?
Of course, I'm in Toronto, but I will come. Sure, I will come, of course, with my friends, with my my
great.
family. Sure.
Very good. Yeah, we're playing at Salle Bourget, which is I've never been, but I know it's a very, very beautiful hall. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that concert.
Yes, John, I have many questions, but I think we will have more opportunities then to discuss these questions in the future. I do wish you a very good luck with your North American tour. You are going to perform in 11 cities, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Yes.
In US and in Canada.
Yeah, only one in Canada and Montreal, but then yeah, we're in New York and Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Santa Fe, two cities in Colorado, Lone Tree, Fort Collins, Detroit. Actually playing two different things in Detroit, very, very different shows. I'm really looking forward to the show. And that there is one very Armenian show we're doing. We were brought in by University of Michigan by a not Armenian, not even the Armenian Studies Department, by something, there's a department called the Department of World Studies, having nothing to do with Armenians per se, but they do bring in people from around the world. They brought us in, and then the local Armenian church, St. John's, heard we were coming in. They said, "Oh, why don't you come play at the church too?" And I said, "Well, you know, that's we don't really usually play churches and blah, blah, blah." But apparently they have a very beautiful hall there and it holds a lot of people. So we're going to do this one more kind of academic setting. And then we're going to play again, not so far away for more of the Armenian community of Detroit, which I'm really looking forward to.
I see. I'm sure you will have wonderful performances and the audience will love it so much. And I hope after this podcast, many people also would know about the concert and will decide to come to visit which direction is closer to them. Is there anything you would like to add, or we forgot to go through it, or we forgot to speak about? You're more than welcome to add. If not, I would like to wish you good luck. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you. I think we covered a lot of ground. I would just end with saying that I think there's several other people that are doing really interesting work. You know, most times when you kind of combine things, like this music is a combination of my Armenian roots and Armenian folk music and Western classical music and modern contemporary classical and all this stuff. Often when you combine things in a way, you know, sometimes that can be very superficial, where you just like make you're a jazz musician, you make it a little oriental sounding, or you know, classical music that has a little jazzy touch. That kind of stuff really is awful sometimes. It's like a pastiche of things that don't belong together. But when you go a little deeper into things and you're combining things, and yet your resources in both those things are deep, and just to some extent, I really believe that's what Komitas did. You know, everybody thinks of Komitas as you know, doing his folk song transcriptions, but everybody knows Komitas through his art songs, mostly through Chinares and Garone and all those beautiful songs. Well, those things are really his roots in Armenian folk music, but also his deep, deep training in Western classical music. You know, he was trained in Berlin. He studied in Paris. That music is written for, you know, Western instruments, Western tuning systems, a piano, a string quartet. That is not an Armenian indigenous thing. But it's filtered through his genius, his deep roots in Armenian folk music, deep roots in Western classical music, filtered through Komitas's genius, gave birth to this radically new and radically beautiful work. You know, you look at it on the page and it looks totally unlike any other music. It really does. So I think when things, when you can go deep into different things, you're not just, Stravinsky has this quote, he says, "Bad composers borrow, good composers steal." When you borrow, you're making this like pastiche of things like I was talking before. But when you steal, it becomes you. It becomes part of your musical DNA. I think that's what happened when I was transcribing and working with all those folk songs. You know, it became part of my own DNA. And there are other people, you know, I'm kind of doing that in classical music, but there's other things going on in artists like Tigran Hamasyan. phenomenal jazz musician,
Yeah.
has very deep roots in, Armenian folk music through the songs he heard from his grandmother growing up in Gyumri. But again, he also has these deep acquired roots in jazz, and through his own abilities has come forth with something that's a wonderful iteration of this Armenian jazz, whatever it is. There's another guy, Arek Gregorian here, who's comes from Bamberg, but then he also has a band called Vishak, which is, I think, really wonderful, and this kind of alternative rock way, but with very deep roots in Armenian culture.
Yeah.
Again, sometimes when it's rock Armenian, it just sounds cheesy and dumb. But when you go really deep into those things, it can be really a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
So there is a lot going on here. And some of it's quite
Yes,
wonderful.
sure. And unfortunately, in diaspora, we don't have many opportunities to meet them here in on stages. And this is great. You are coming, really. This is a wonderful event, and Armenian community is very excited to see you. So you are more than
Great. Well, people should come up and say hi after the concert. I'd like to be very accessible. Okay, very good.
Yes.
We'll see you on the 13th.
Yes, of course. Right. And good luck. And see you very soon, John. Yes. Thank you very much one more time. And I just want to remind that my interview was with John Hodian. John is Armenian and American composer and the leader of Naghash Ensemble. Thank you, John. And bye. See you then.